and Trace Seaver. And I'm here to tell you about the repoze.bfg web framework. First, a little bit about repose itself. Repose itself is not a particular technology. Repose is sort of a brand, and we have a bunch of packages that form repose or form different aspects of web development under a WSGI environment. WSGI means Web Services Gateway Interface. For anybody who doesn't know that, who here has heard of WSGI or knows about WSGI? Lots of people. Okay. Who here uses WSGI normally? Okay, that's fewer. So I'm going to pull this thing out of here. Okay, so the idea is that lots of Zope developers, as we see, don't actually, they know about WSGI. They just have never used WSGI because Zope doesn't really make it all that available to use out of the box. Plone is based on Zope, so of course Plone can't let you use WSGI out of the box. We have several products that make it possible to run Plone under WSGI. We have middleware that makes it possible to do specific things like Malta just made an image stretching piece of middleware or an image shrinking piece of middleware. We have transaction management middleware, all sorts of stuff that have to do with WSGI stuff. I'm not going to go too much into WSGI right now because I have a bunch of other stuff to talk about, but if you have questions about WSGI, just let me know. The other major goal of Repose, and this is a lot more important than the first one, is to let non-Zope people who have never used Zope before, would never touch it in their lives, to use Zope technologies. So we're taking a lot of things that are actually in Zope and pulling them outside of Zope in order to make people who use TurboGears and Pylons and Django and other Python web frameworks able to use Zope technology. So that said, repose.bfg goes off the wagon and says that, okay, that's good and all, that goal, but let's make a web framework. So there are reasons for this, which I'll get into, but this is a relatively new project. We started it in July. Essentially, these are the people that have sort of made, sort of major contributions to it, including, the folks from Agendaless. Carlos, is Carlos here? Carlos de la Guardia? Hello, Carlos. And Malta, who you just saw. Stefan Edetsova, who's this? Stefan here? And Fernando, who I know is not here. So the name means big effing gun or big friendly giant. You can choose as your management sees fit. So, I love Zope. Okay, Zope has been very, very, very good to me. Zope has given me lots of money and sort of net fame and all sorts of good things. And if you're like me, you really like Zope. If you're also like me, Zope can be challenging sometimes, and you'd like to sort of step off the Zope train every now and again to sort of use something new and cool, but you can't because it's sort of, the hood's sort of welded shut in various places. So, why? Why would I make a new web framework when there are 27,000 of them out there already? Well, I sort of looked around and I said, okay, I actually gave a talk in 2005 at the Dutch or the German-speaking Zope users group in Germany, and I sort of predicted doom and gloom for Zope, more or less, and said you better start to look around because Zope is sort of waning right now. I'm not sure that that's entirely true, but it sort of feels like there's no new blood coming into the Zope community so much. It's sort of weird. I go to these conferences and I see the same old people. I say, hello, I've seen you before. I know you. I've seen you for 5 years. Whatever. There are people here who I've never seen before, but it certainly seems like the community, if it's growing, is growing at a much slower rate. And Zope 2 is still kicking, but it's only due to Plone, which is the reason I'm here, more or less. So in 2002 or 2001, Zope 3 was started. And Zope 3 was meant to be a replacement for Zope 2. And as it turns out, Zope 3 is an application development platform that not many people have taken up in anger. I mean, there are lots and lots of great libraries in Zope 3. Using Zope 3 technologies inside of Zope 2 has made Zope 2 development much, much more palatable. And one of the other things about Zope 3, though, as an application developer, is that application developers are encouraged to use the component architecture, the Zope component architecture, which is neither here nor there. There's Grok, which came a little bit later, which tries to make Zope 3 itself easier to use, but it's still essentially Zope 3. Okay. There's Django out there. Now, the first three options to me feel like reasonable options. I can go one of these ways and sort of use one of these frameworks. But I look at each of them, and they all feel a little weird to me, because I'm sort of hopping from one platform that I don't agree with all the choices that they've made to another platform that I don't agree with all the choices they've made, or this other platform that's sort of a shell on top of one of the other ones. I could hop off the Zope bandwagon altogether and go to Django. Django's really nice. I've developed a few Django applications. But it's pretty big, and it's not very small. You know, it's not a agile thing. They sort of, you know, sort of Python on Rails or whatever. You know, they make a lot of decisions for you. And then there's Pylons. TurboGears 2 is based on Pylons, and we have Mark Graham here, who's a TurboGears 2 lead guy. Those things are more up my alley. They're very small. They don't have a lot of pieces to them. You could fit Pylons in a corner of the archetypes package. Pylons is tiny. Okay. They'll ship the next version. You know, and a lot of times that's all you need to do. That's all you need to make a web application. Something very small. You know, TurboGears makes more choices for you, but it's still very small. Unfortunately, it's geared towards sort of, you know, relational database apps and URL dispatch apps. If I said this to any other crowd, they would look at me like I had two heads, you know, right? I mean, that's all there is, right? There are only relational database apps, and there are only URL dispatch apps. That's it. But Zope gives you a lot more, and what's great about Zope is that some of the things that it anticipates, you end up needing, you know. And then, of course, there's other things that they're not really Zope-like, and they don't have any traction or whatever. So in any case, I went through this whole list, and I said, well, it seems reasonable, although slightly silly, to create a new web framework, but I'm going to do it anyway, because I want to use what I want to use. I want what I want. I don't want this stuff. Okay. So the goals. The goals are familiarity. We want it to be like Zope, but less. We want it to be simple. This means pay only for what you eat. So, you know, if you get a repoze.bfg application, you're not going to get, 21 megabytes of code that you don't understand. You're going to get code that you know what it does mostly. Another very, very important thing is speed. We have a lot of people come to us with Zope 2 applications, particularly people with Plone applications, who've sort of coded themselves into a box. They've made an application, it works fine, except it gets less than optimal performance. And they come to us, they say, can you make it faster? A lot of times, the answer is, no. No, I can't. I have to start over again, you know, because it's not an application that hits the Plone sweet spot for speed of, you know, using caching and stuff. And that's a tough thing for people to swallow when you tell them that. But okay, so we try to steer people along the right path from the beginning when they come to us. The Zope community has a culture of non-documentation. Okay, we want to change that. We'd like to make sure that I make sure that when I add a function to one of the packages that make up repoze.bfg, that function is documented, either in narrative or in the API docs or whatever. If it's not documented, it is bug. Okay, and then collaboration. We want to use other people's stuff. Well, you know, there are form libraries like Tosca widgets, you know, a Django form library that somebody came up with, a Django knockoff form library. We'd like to make it possible, and we'd like to encourage the use of that stuff rather than sort of picking from the pool of only Zope things. Okay, so what does BFG do? Well, BFG does 4 simple things. It maps URLs to code. It provides mechanisms that allow developers to make declarative security assertions. This is one of the things that other frameworks don't do for you. And it provides text and HTML templating facilities, and that's it. It also allows for the use of existing zope libraries through ZCML. Some of them anyway, not all of them. Here's what BFG doesn't do. There is no database, there's no persistence engine, there are no sessions, there's no cataloging, there's no searching, there's no ZMI, there's no through the web code. We don't share any code with Zope 3 or 5 for views. Essentially, it has less, it doesn't have more than it does have. It's about 3,500 lines of code. Okay. Also, another thing is the application is the application. When you start up a BFG application, you're not starting up the framework. You know, when you start Plone, you start up Zope. When you start up a BFG application, the only thing you're starting is the application you wrote, which is de rigueur for, you know, sort of other Python web frameworks. When you make a Pylons application, of course, you start the application. Duh, you know. In Zope, you start up Zope all the time. We're moving more to this sort of write an application in a framework concept. We generate an application for you using the Paster framework, and you can sort of go from there. So I mentioned this before. Other web frameworks use this thing called URL dispatch, where you sort of provide a mapping of things that smell a lot like regular expressions to names of things that are code. And that's how you sort of map URLs to Python callables. I call that URL dispatch. I don't know what other people call it. Then there's the Zope way of sort of traversing an object graph to get to something callable. Both ways are useful in different scenarios. We support both. So this is probably the most important bit of BFG and what makes it different than Zope 3 or Grok in this case. We use the Zope component architecture. I used it to make the BFG package and most of the add-on packages for BFG. But application developers, when you write a BFG application, are not expected to know the component architecture. They are expected to know Python. They are not expected to adapt anything or use any utilities or any of that. They are expected to call functions. And hopefully every Python program understands functions. So here are the components that make up a repose.bfg application. We have a WSGI pipeline. I'll explain that a little bit later. We have a WSGI application that we call a router, which in sort of Zope terms is equivalent to the Zope publisher. We have this application registry idea, which is configured currently either through ZCML or decorators, ZCML being more Zope 3-like and decorators being more sort of Grok-like. Then we have these things called views, which are controllers in sort of other languages or other frameworks. And then we have templates. And these are the only components that make up that the base package lets you sort of wire together to make applications. These are the dependencies. These are the package dependencies of repose.bfg. There are about 27 of them. I am not happy that there are 27 of them. There should be about maybe 15. But we sort of have to unglom some stuff in some of the Zope dependencies to get rid of them. But it's way less, it's way fewer than Zope 3, or Plone. There are just, there's not much in there. Okay, so how it works. Well, we have the internet, and then we have this sort of box up there that says WSGI. WSGI is a protocol that lets a WSGI server talk to a WSGI application. I know that's self-referential, but I don't know how better to explain it. Essentially, when a request comes in, the request is going to make it to a WSGI server. That WSGI server is going to pass that request off to the WSGI application, which in the simplest configuration is this BFG router thing. That's the simplest thing. There might be intermediate applications along the way called middleware that sort of modify either the request or the response on the way out. And that's actually generally useful for lots and lots of things. You can imagine something that does caching, You can imagine something that gzips. You can imagine something that sort of, I think Malta just made something that actually changes the HTML and sort of makes a resource registry-like piece of middleware. The nice thing about middleware is that it has absolutely nothing to do with your application. It is completely independent of it, and other people can use it. Even people who don't use BFG or Plone or any of these other things that stuff can run on. So right off the bat, WSGI lets us sort of move the inappropriate stuff out of our application into middleware. Then once we get down to the application, we have these three concepts, these models, views, and templates. Lots of people refer to Rails and to pylons as model view controller systems. This is the same concept, we just use different terminology for it. We use sort of the Django terminology, which is an MTV framework, models, templates, and views. So but basically they're the same thing. Okay, so models are content objects. Okay. A model is if you're used to Zope, a model is something that lives in a ZODB. But in BFG, you do not have to use the ZODB. You can put all your data in a relational database, in an RDF graph, serialized inside an XML file, whatever. Paul put something together, a demo application that actually just has all content in an XML file. Repoze.bfg depends in absolutely no way on the ZODB. Okay, but models are content objects. Here's the simplest possible model. We import a couple things. We make a class that's an interface. Excuse me, we make an interface. We make a class that implements the interface and accepts a name in its constructor. That's a model. Views in BFG, unlike in Zope or 5, are not classes. They are functions. And they are functions which accept a context and a request. Now they can be instances. You can make a class that has a call method and make an instance of it that accepts requests for stuff. But typically they're functions. And unlike in Zope, where if you write a view in Zope, a Zope view can return anything. A Zope view can return a string. It can return an integer, return none, it can return anything. We've made it necessary to return an object called a response, which is simply an iterable plus a bunch of headers and some extra information. This made the implementation much simpler than the Zope publisher. Paul.
Request is an instance of what?
Request is currently an instance of Ian Bicking's WebOb request, WSGI request stuff. So the question was, what is a request? So so the view can either use a template to generate the response, or it can just return back a string or an return back a response object directly, or it can call out to some library that generates a response like the templating stuff. So here's a view that just returns a response directly. This is hello world, return a response of hello world from WebOb import response. Here's the same concept, except we import from a templating library this thing called render template to response. We have a hello world function that takes a context and a request, and we call this thing called render template to response, pass it a template name, pass it a context, pass it my name. Presumably it's going to say hello Chris. So the thing that gets passed in here, this context object, is actually usually, well, always a model object. So we have access to both the request and the current context that we're viewing. So we can use that data inside of the view code to go and generate a response. This should be sort of, feeling comfortable to Zope people. I think this is how most of it works. So there are several built-in templating options in repoze.bfg. The main one is called Chameleon. It used to be called Z3CPT, but if you can imagine saying that over and over again, you can understand why it's called Chameleon. This was written by Malta Borch. It lets you use zope page template or Genshi syntax, but it's about 10 or 15 times faster than either of those. It's quite fast. Since we depend on libxml2, we also make it possible to use XSLT to do templating. I wrote sort of a throwaway, example of a external templating thing, and I used Jinja 2, which is a Django-like templating engine to do that. But you can basically use whatever templating engine you want. This is Dell. Dude, I'm getting a Dell.
How much did they pay you for that?
So I'm going to skip this particular piece. Repose.bfg has a slightly different traversal model than Zope does. It's a little simplified. Essentially, the difference between Zope and BFG is that you can't, once you get to a view, you can't traverse through a view. You can only traverse to a view. Dude, you're getting a PDP-7. Okay. So view registrations can be done this way in ZCML. There are these BFG:view directives. You sort of register the interface that the view is for and the function name. And there's a few other options in here that you can register, but basically this is akin to a browser page directive in 5 or Zope 3, if anybody's used to those things. These things that it points at as view equals are the functions that I was showing you before, the hello world functions. And the 4 says if the context object is an I/my model, then use this thing. Otherwise, use some other thing. If there's no 4, then it's for everything. You can also use sort of Grok style, or I guess Martian style, or however you want to think about it, decorators to do the same thing. You don't need to use ZCML to register views. You can use this BFG view decorator. So this essentially does the same thing that the ZCML is doing. So this template, which no one can read, I'm certain, but it's very simple. In Zope 2.10, a view page template is 309 requests a second. In BFG view plus Chameleon, it's 869 requests a second. So out of the box, we're not bottlenecked by the templating engine. Lots of the stuff in Plone, people sort of make an assumption that lots of the stuff in Plone is bottlenecked on some Plone-y thing, but a lot of it is actually bottlenecked on the templating engine, which is EPT. And so we've started out with this different engine with the knowledge that we can make it faster. It's not sort of stuck in the mud.
Can we steal yours?
Sure.
We already are. Awesome.
Yeah.
And there is actually another person involved in conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
So half the team is already
Yep.
involved, unless you count Malta. You count Malta as well?
Sure. So in a BFG application, less memory usage. You can also run more than one BFG application in a single process. This is not true of Zope 2 and Zope 3 applications. You can have at most one Zope 2 or Zope 3 application per process, at least if you use any ZCML, due to the way that they do their boot up. Another really nice thing, sort of, not pointing any fingers here, but starting Plone is a little painful. So the startup speed of a repose.bfg application out of the box, this is not a fair fight because, of course, we don't have a lot of functionality in it, but is less than a second. So you can easily restart an application. Then again, we're not really after the sort of Plone crowd. We're after people who know what they want to do and just want to build an application from scratch. You can also cause a reload to happen whenever you change any code on the file system, this is a feature that we didn't add to it. This is just based on some code from Ian Bicking's paster thing that'll just restart the process anytime it notices anything in sysmodules changes. Template auto reload, this sort of stock stuff for zope. You can use WSGI middleware to do profiling, to get different exception handlers, use deliverance to theme things, get caching, use transaction management. There's sessioning middleware out there in the form of Beaker. We didn't write all this stuff. We can just sort of use it. If you go to wsgi.org, you can see a bunch of these things that you can sort of latch onto. It's already compatible with Python 2.5 and 2.6 because it's very small. And every API function is documented in full at that web address. I am going to omit the project setup demo because I'd like time for questions, actually. In the future, folks hopefully will sort of pick this up. Some work has been done by Malte and Stefan to develop Voodoo, which is a point and spray web framework. I have that right? On top of repoze.bfg. They're pouring a lot of effort into sort of packages, add-on packages for BFG, so like these layout things, a bunch of middleware and stuff like that. That's going really, really well. There's some really neat stuff in there. BFG itself is going to stay very minimal, and we're just going to push everything into add-on packages. There's another package called repoze.lemonade, which we're going to try to push a lot of the sort of CMF functionality into. BFG itself is not going to do any of that.
Did life give you lemons?
Exactly. I also wanted to mention that there is going to be a repose birds of feather that Chris Perkins and myself are going to host. I think it's in here at the end of today. There's a repose sprint on Saturday and Sunday at the Career and Tech Center, and I'm not quite sure what we're going to do, but in any case, I have raced to the end, and I would like time for questions if anyone has any questions. Yes? Probably until we fix the dependency issues or investigate sort of their zip file import thing. Not good because it uses lots and lots of files. Even the 27 eggs that are in there, I think, probably exceed the 1,000 file limit on Google App Engine.
They did something to fix something.
Yeah, there's some way that you can make a zip file and put stuff in there, but currently we don't use package resources for everything, so we have to fix that. So it's possible. It's probable. Actually, I would like some help if anyone wants to do that.
There's the LXML problem.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's true. We do depend on LXML currently to do, which has C bindings in it. So Malte has done some work towards making it work with plain elementary, which would get rid of that. I don't think there's like proxy code or something in there. So there are a few hurdles. I should be less sanguine about it. Yes?
What's the security model?
The security model is ACL based, as opposed to sort of role permission based. Essentially, when you get done with traversal or done with URL dispatch or whatever, the context object is checked for an ACL. The ACL is run through. It says from the request, there's a security policy that sucks the user information out of the request. It compares that information against the ACL if you're either allowed or denied. So it's not quite like Zopes. It's a little different. Anybody? Yeah.
So persistence is quite it's pluggable, like you said, it's not relying on ZDB.
Right. Yep.
Have you already experimented with relational storage?
We have. I mean, this to the extent that in Zope we're used to sort of saying like we have relational storage that holds pickles. I haven't done that in BFG or anything. There's no rel storage thing, but of course we don't depend on ZDB, so it's just a relational database. Carlos wrote an application called Shootout, which is purely based on Postgres. It doesn't have any, it's sort of URL dispatch based, Postgres based, as if you might write another application in another framework like.
It's some kind of like the Django model.
Exactly, exactly, yeah.
SQL queries, I mean,
And actually, that was using SQL Alchemy. So, yeah.
But getting ZODB and catalog into your BFG application is 15 lines of code. So.
Anybody? All right, well, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Oh, yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
Just, I'm going to demo some of an application that serves clone content using repose BFG at 2:30. I have a 15-minute slot because one of the slots was canceled.
Okay, so
You can do it.
Carlos said he's going to demo a
I'm going to demo how you get clone content served 20 times faster using repose BFG.
right. So he's going to demo how you get clone content served 20 times faster using repoze BFG at 2:30. Where? Polaris. In Polaris. Okay. Great. Paul.
Chris deserves a lot of credit because he actually released comprehensive, written, rewritten, rewritten docs before he released the software. And he's ruthless.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate it.